Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I'm Brandon Riley, I'm the Capital Projects Manager at the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. We're very excited to present to you the preferred plan for the Mellon Park Action Plan that we've been developing over the last few months. We're expecting a larger crowd tonight, so I think what we're going to try and do is keep everyone on mute. We're going to have a couple opportunities for breakout rooms to have actual conversation and dialogue, so you can hold on to questions until then. That'd be great. Or if you want to just write them in the chat, we'll take a couple pauses during the presentation to answer any questions, especially if they're clarifications or need me to repeat anything. So without further ado, just kind of a brief agenda for what we're going to be doing tonight. We wanted to start off with just kind of a brief overview or kind of a recap of the project to date. It's been a minute since we met last, so just kind of a refresher and maybe some people who haven't joined us before, just so everyone's up to speed on what the action plan is, why we're here, what we're trying to accomplish. We're also going to report out what we heard from our last round of community engagement around the concept presentations that we presented. Tell you all the general feedback that we got and how that affected our thinking in terms of the preferred plan. We're going to actually present to you the preferred plan in more detail. We'll walk you through the improvements we're proposing on the north side and the south side. We'll take some breaks to do breakout rooms after each of those presentations, as well as a couple polls, go over stormwater and some other kind of site diagrams. And then if we have time at the end, we might, if there's still some opportunity for some more open discussion or a little more informal Q&A, we'll be here until 7:30, and that's what we'll try and do. So just a refresher of what the action plan is, what we're trying to accomplish while we're all here. I mean, these are the goals. Some of you have seen these before, but these are really the goals of the action plan that we just thought it was important to kind of bring back to the surface. So one of the main goals of the action plan is to create a unifying vision for the park. As we're all aware, Mellon Park is kind of cut into by Fifth Avenue. The two halves of the park, the north half and south half, often feel very different spaces. They feel like very different parks. Some people don't even realize they're the same park. So creating a vision that really looks at the park as a whole, guiding future improvements for both parks as a whole, so they're complementary and they begin to function as one park instead of kind of these two separate entities. The other thing we're trying to do, and we'll start to get into this a little bit tonight, is the action plan is going to prioritize future improvements. It's one thing to create this grand vision, but we have to figure out a way to execute that vision and actually implement it. So we want to understand, what are community priorities? What are the funding priorities? What are the small projects we can implement quickly? What are the ones that require longer term thinking and planning, and really create a roadmap for how we're going to implement this plan. And along with that, with prioritizing projects, is trying to leverage other projects. Are there nearby roadway improvements or pedestrian safety improvements that DOMI may be heading up, or stormwater or utility infrastructure that PWSA may be heading up? Are there other projects in and around Mellon Park that can bring benefit to Mellon Park that we should try and coordinate with and try and maximize the benefits for all parties involved? The action plan is also seeking to focus on equity and inclusion. Mellon Park, as we know, is in the heart of, it directly abuts 5 neighborhoods with 2 more very close proximity. It serves a pretty wide cross-section of diverse Pittsburgh residents, both on the socioeconomic scale, racially, culturally. So there's a lot of people, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different needs, wants, wishes for Mellon Park that we need to make sure that all voices are heard and that Mellon Park feels welcoming and open to everyone who uses this park on a daily, weekly basis, etc. And also making sure this is a community-driven process. We've been trying very hard to make sure that all the improvements that we're proposing came directly from community feedback, meaning we're not directing down what we think is important for Mellon Park. It's really to make sure that your voices are being heard. And the plans that we're presenting are responding to your needs, your concerns, and what you want the future of Mellon Park to be as members of the community who use it. Kind of just a quick update on where we are in the project schedule, the project process. So when this project kicked off in early 2021, we spent a lot of time, basically January through August, just listening, just understanding more about Mellon Park, how people use it, what they want to see, what their issues are, what their challenges are. We took all of that feedback and then we developed concepts that we presented last October that tried to respond to that, to address some of those challenges. We tested some of our ideas in the community. We got additional feedback through those meetings as well as surveys, which we then took to complete and develop our preferred plan, which we're ready to present today. So there's not necessarily design options, it's one preferred design, and we need to get your input on it again. And then based on that input, we will tweak the design, adjust the design, and put it kind of into its final form. And then we'll wrap up the action plan and the report and all the other documents that go with it, hopefully by the end of May, but pretty close to that date. So what we heard in our last presentation when we presented concepts. So if some of you were part of those conversations, in October, we presented kind of our concept recommendations for the action plan, based on the feedback we heard during the listening session. So one of those plans was kind of what we're calling our overall improvements plan. This was really just kind of the baseline improvements, not necessarily options, but these were recommendations that we think should just be considered as the standard recommendations. And then we identified other areas where there really was opportunity to consider a couple different options that were viable, that we felt brought benefit and get people's input. So the feedback we got for the overall plans that we presented, one is a lot of people responded very favorably to this idea of focusing on pedestrian access and safety. It's hard to get to Mellon Park. The intersections are dangerous for pedestrians. It's not clear where the entrances are, or if the park is actually a park, especially in the case of the south side. So focusing on making pedestrian access safer and easier and more intuitive was something a lot of people responded positively to. Parking is another issue that we got a lot of good feedback. As we know, the parking lot that's currently in Mellon Park, specifically on the north side, is not adequate. It's not standard, it's not enough spaces, it's chaotic. So the plan that we provided showed more parking, which a lot of people responded to. We need more parking. It's a use. We don't love parking, but it's something we need. But a lot of people pushed back against it as well. And this idea of sacrificing park space to provide more parking, is that a good thing? More asphalt in the park, et cetera. So trying to strike that balance was something we tried to do with the action plan for the preferred plan. More park amenities, benches, tables, trash receptacles, bike racks. People really requested those, wanted to see those integrated into the plans on both sides of the park. Events was another big issue that had kind of a lot of different opinions. When we started with the listening sessions, we got a lot of feedback that people, one, liked the events that currently occur in Mellon Park, Fair in the Park, Juneteenth, Bach Beethoven brunch, etc. And some people wanted to see a lot more diversity of events, meaning that they'd like to see some more things happen or some different things happen in the park. So our concepts showed some options where we actually proposed new event spaces or repurposed some areas for events. And we actually got a lot of pushback on that when we showed that. I think people realized that more event space isn't necessarily the best option, that a lot of people come to Mellon Park, not just for events, but also for the peace and quiet. And that, this place shouldn't feel like a circus with events happening, 24/7. So again, finding that balance of how do we accommodate events? How do we accommodate a use that people want, but also kind of respect the openness and the natural benefits that people get when they come to this park. And along those lines, this was also repeated, respecting the landscape, the history, the trees. Mellon Park is it's a historic site, designated historic site. It's historic protections on it. It's also a designated arboretum. People like the landscape generally. Its openness, the trees, the lawn, etc. So making sure we're not just programming things for the sake of programming it, and respecting what's there, respecting the draw that Mellon Park has. And off-leash dogs. People, this is another, we'll talk about this more a bit later in the presentation, but a lot of people want an off-leash dog park. A lot of people are against an off-leash dog park. We'll get to that in a little bit. We also presented different concepts for those option areas that I showed. So on the north side, we presented some different field layouts or options for how fields and community space could be organized, some different options for where the splash pad and playground could be located. On the terrace garden, or the south side, we showed some different options for treatments for the terrace garden, whether it's historic restoration or can it be converted into more of an event space, as well as options for repurposing the quote unquote chicken coop building that used to be part of the Mellon's kind of agricultural gardening area, including a more garden space or again, another event space. The feedback we got there on the north side, people generally liked the idea of the play area being located up on top of sort of the open lawn space where the art pieces currently are. But there was some concern about proximity to Fifth Avenue. So making sure we were balancing that from a safety perspective was important. We had a lot of support for converting one of the baseball fields into a multi-use rectangular sports field. Obviously, baseball is a big user, baseball and softball, big user group in Mellon Park, but so are, in particular, the East End Raiders football and cheer teams, as well as soccer leagues. And there's a clamoring for space to support those sports that are not currently supported well at Mellon Park, but there's definitely a need. Providing and making sure we're maintaining informal open spaces on both sides of the park. That was another thing that came up. Just because an area is an open lawn space and there's nothing that's happening in it, doesn't mean it needs to have something put in it. Doesn't mean that's where a basketball court should go, or that's where a play, there's benefit to just having open passive lawn areas where people can picnic, throw a Frisbee, or just kind of sit and enjoy the landscape. It's an important park experience and it needs to be maintained on both sides. Moving to the south side of the Terrace Garden, people really wanted to see the Terrace Garden restored. They didn't want to see it repurposed into some other use. So some historic restoration or repair of the garden to sort of bring it back, similar to what occurred at the Walled Garden, was overwhelmingly supported. The Olmsted Frog Pond, there was a pond that was designed by the Olmsted brothers on the south half of the park. A lot of people were in favor of bringing that element back. It's gone now. But there are also concerns about open water in an open pond with dogs getting in it or safety hazard for children, et cetera. So is there a way to balance, bring back that historic element, but maybe make in a way that's safer? And then similarly at the chicken coop building, people like the idea of garden space. They also like the idea of lawn space. There is no runaway favorite in terms of concepts. So is there a way to combine those two ideas? And this is just a quick slide kind of showing you how some of the voting went for some of those concepts. So we had some clear choices for the the field option as well as terrace garden. People predominantly preferred one, but for the play areas and the chicken coop, it was pretty evenly split. People liked ideas from both. So trying to find ways to mesh those ideas was what the preferred plan sought to do. So before we dive into it, we do want to discuss something, kind of get it out of the way about dog parks, and specifically explain why we're not proposing a dog park in Mellon Park as part of the preferred plan. Now, we recognize a lot of people use Mellon Park to take their dog. A lot of people want a dog park in Mellon Park. We heard that loud and clear. But when we went to do the design work and actually try and find a place for it, it wasn't as easy as it sounded. The first thing we did was we looked at the city design standards for dog parks. These are the design standards that are set for when you're siting a new dog park. We have a lot of different improvements that we have to consider in Mellon Park, and this was another thing we were trying to fit in. So this was a good place to start to kind of tell us how, what are at least the requirements for a dog park if you're putting a new one in the city. So, it requires 1.5 to 2 acres of open area, well drained, 5% slope or less, which 5% is almost flat by Pittsburgh standards, but that's a limiting factor. It needs to avoid interference with other established uses. So that's a baseball field, a playground, or maybe an area where events are consistently held. making sure we're not interfering with those. They need to be located 200 feet from any adjacent residences or businesses. And they need to avoid sensitive environmental habitats or protect specimen trees with fencing. So those are and many of you may be aware or can point out that there are some dog parks at the city that don't follow those guidelines, which is true. And that's because these guidelines are actually a result of the challenges that the city has experienced in those dog parks. So to us, it didn't seem to make sense or to be responsible to just sort of ignore the guidance and just try and shoehorn a dog park in that doesn't meet this criteria, because this criteria is founded on struggles the city has maintaining dog parks, because they are hard. So then what we did is we took that criteria and we overlaid it on Mellon Park. So the first thing we did was we identified all the areas of a 5% slope or less, which, like I said, it's surprising. You would think there was a lot more that would qualify, but other than field areas, there's not a lot of flat area on either side of Mellon Park. The next thing we did was we overlaid that 200-foot buffer to kind of give us these sort of interior areas that, you know, were far enough away from residences and businesses. And then we put in, you know, this box represents what 1.5 acres size is. And, you know, the conclusion is there's no room for it here. And we recognize that's disappointing. We recognize there's a need. And there's a need for it in the East End. We just, based on this, don't think Mellon Park is the appropriate place to do it. Even this area, you know, a lot of people pointed to this in the surveys, kind of that open lawn area with the art pieces as being a perfect place for a dog park. It exceeds 5% slope. It has some very large trees that would have to be fenced off. And, you know, that it's just, there's too many factors to make a dog park really viable in this location. So, it's not that will never be a dog park in the East End, but Mellon Park, it's not the place for it. So with that, well, I guess, are there any questions or concerns in the chat that we can address before we start diving into the preferred plan? Okay, I see a few questions. I think we can answer some of these when we get into the breakout room, so I'm not going to answer them just yet. So if that's okay with everyone. So diving into the preferred plan. So what we'd like to do next is we'll talk about the preferred plan. We'll present Mellon Park North, the improvements we're proposing there, and then do a little breakout room so we can kind of discuss it in more detail. In smaller groups, and then we'll do Mellon Park South and do the same format, do a smaller breakout room and discuss that in a smaller setting as well. But before we launch into talking about what these improvements are, we think it's important just to kind of set the mindset of what this preferred plan is and what we're really trying to do, just so you can keep it in the back of your mind as you're you know, taking all of this in. So the preferred plan is really meant to be a high-level master planning document, which is a fancy way of saying we don't have all the details figured out. Everything that we're proposing is conceptually based and grounded in reality. It should be buildable, but when you actually go to do the work and you really understand the site constraints and you get into the nitty-gritty detail, things are likely going to change. So we're not there yet. And this plan will adjust when it goes to get implemented based on what's out there in the field. It's also intended to establish a design intent and a framework. So some things are intentionally vague in this. For instance, we're showing areas for a splash pad and a playground, but we're not showing equipment. And that's intentional. The reason being is what we're trying to do is we're trying to show the locations of where we think things should be, the general sizes of where things should be, their relationship to one another, the look and feel. But we're trying to build in some flexibility and some latitude for designers for when they actually go to do the work to be able to respond to some of those either site constraints, budget constraints, etc. So that's kind of creating, you know, guardrails for them to stay in between, but really give them some leeway to do their job and implement this plan to the best of its ability based on the constraints that will present themselves. And again, it's meant to be a tool to guide future investment and fundraising. This is kind of a roadmap that we're trying to create. So some things are going to be a little more general, and things change over the course of time, and we need to be flexible to be able to respond to that. And along those lines, everything we're showing is subject to additional community engagement and input when we go to implement it. When that splash pad or that playground goes to get built, we need to have community meetings around what kind of equipment are going to be put in. What are the colors? What's the shapes and size? What do people want to see? This isn't the last interaction that we're going to have, or the city will have with you folks when the plan is getting built. There's much more opportunity to get involved and to get your input heard throughout the future. All this is to say, none of this is etched in stone. When it goes to be implemented, things will change. So just try and keep that in the back of your mind, that this is really just an idea. It's not concrete yet. So diving into the north half of the park. So one of the first things that we tried to do with this, and one of the things that we responded to, is making sure we were improving access, specifically pedestrian access. So that includes intersection improvements, such as what we're showing here at the corner of 5th and Beechwood. That makes it a safer pedestrian crossing space. That includes changing traffic signals to have a pedestrian-only crossing phase at these key major intersections. Currently, that doesn't exist, to allow people to safely enter the park. We're also providing new entrances. Technically, this is an existing entrance, but really you're walking into a parking lot. So really reconfiguring this to make this a safe pedestrian access point, as well as providing a new pedestrian entrance actually at the corner of 5th and Penn. It's one of the most visible corners of the park with those two busy travelways, and you can't get right into the park as a pedestrian at that location. And then also upgrading these existing entrances with these entry plazas, these small entry plazas that have signage, a bike rack, a trash receptacle, something that tells you, that communicates that this is a park, that helps you come in, understand where you are, and helps you get to where you want to go in the park itself. Along those lines of access, upgrading and enhancing kind of the shared use path system that currently goes through Mellon Park. This is a busy area. It's not difficult. It's difficult to walk to. It's also difficult to bike to. So currently, a lot of cyclists actually come down Beechwood and come through Mellon Park because it's the safest way to get to another part of the city, namely Shadyside. So we're keeping that connection, the shared use path, which allows both pedestrians and cyclists to safely navigate through the park, maintaining that connection to the Shadyside neighborhood. We're also adding a secondary connection that would sort of loop cyclists around the park and connect up to the existing bike infrastructure in East Liberty and Bakery Square. And then again, extending that to the corner of Penn and 5th, as potential bike lane expansion or bike infrastructure expansion, making sure we're accommodating for that now. And then relocating the parking lot and expanding it. So we're still showing the parking lot in this location, where the goal here is to get cars out of the way as quickly as possible to make sure that this is a pedestrian dominated park space. So the parking area would bring you in, it'd be one-way circulation, and would kind of be located where the playground, splash pad, and basketball court area is now, but it keeps it close to 5th Avenue, kind of tucked up 5th Avenue. That's not a super pleasant space for pedestrians anyways, and also allows us an opportunity to expand parking. We did reduce the number of spaces we were showing from our concept design by a little bit, but we're still adding about 20 spaces to what is there now. Not enough, but definitely an improvement that should help things in the long run. And when we do that, it opens up the center of the park for actual community space. So what we're also doing is creating what we're kind of calling this shared community space, a community green, a community plaza with a concession and restroom building. But really, as you enter the park, the first thing you're greeted by is not a parking lot, but actual open community space that encourages you to sit, hang out, orients you to where you are in the park before you go off to do whatever you're there to do in the park. But really kind of change the dynamic that the park currently has and give it some breathing room. And if we put the parking where we're showing it, we obviously have to relocate some existing amenities. So one of the things we're proposing is locating the playground and splash pad up on top of the hilltop. And there's a couple reasons why we're doing that. One, it gets it farther away from the street, both Fifth Avenue and parking. So from a kind of parent family safety perspective, this is a better location. It also helps engage this open lawn space a little bit better than what's currently out there. We don't need to program this lawn, but giving people a reason to be up on that plateau with its great views and this open lawn area, encouraging children to kind of run out, families to use the space, will sort of help spread the activity out in the park a little more than what it is currently today. And also nestling it in these existing trees and kind of creating almost this children's grove, and really leaning into the arboretum that Mellon Park has on it, was a design move we thought was worth pursuing. Additionally, we'll have to relocate the basketball area. Basketball courts will be relocated here, kind of keeping it central to that community space, convenient to that concession area, instead of sort of tucked up against the mechanical equipment of the tennis bubble. But it's a popular space and it should be treated as such, and given a convenient location, kind of in the center of the park. And also adding a pickleball court, something we got a lot of comments about trying to bring into the park. The tennis bubble is going to be undergoing some upgrades. That existing trailer that's there will be removed, and kind of a modular addition put on the building, which leaves some space in this corner of the park to potentially add pickleball as well as some seating opportunities. And then the other big changes we're proposing are the fields. So we know there's kind of issues with the fields in terms of availability. Some of that's permitting, some of that's, there's a lot of challenges. Right now, field 1 is one of the only fields of its size, so you have a lot of adult use there. It's the only field in the park that has lights. So in the kind of the shoulder seasons, there's also pressure from the youth leagues who need to have a lit field so they can play and practice. And it also has the largest lawn area, which means that's where ideally soccer practice, football practice, cheer, etc. could take place. So there's a lot of pressure out here. What we're proposing to do is remove the middle field. Leave field 1 as it is, upgrade it with new drainage, add a batting cage, but keep that field where it is. Remove the center field and replace it with a rectangular, kind of informal rectangular field space, and then upgrade what's currently called field 3, making it a full 200-foot outfield, adding lights so it can support Little League use in the shoulder seasons, actually adding lights to all 3. And we think that that's actually going to help distribute some of the pressure that these fields are experiencing. Now we know that there's permitting issues that the city is working on to help that, but we think this is also going to help that as well. And additionally, this field can also serve as an informal event space when necessary. We know Juneteenth, the event happens out here, but there's really no good place to host events. So if this field is really treated more of an informal open space, it could be used to host some public events, but really also can be used for informal practices, soccer games, etc. That's going to help provide a need or from a large user group of Mellon Park that currently doesn't exist. And some other things are in terms of upgrading amenities, that's benches, that's trash receptacles, it's also shelter space. There's only one shelter on the north side. So what we're proposing is actually to add some additional shelters. That includes breaking apart this one shelter that's here, and scattering a few smaller shelters that might be kind of used on a first come first serve basis. Similarly, adding some shelter space around the pickleball court, and then creating an overlook with a shelter and some additional seating area that kind of overlooks where people kind of gather to watch baseball games now along that central path. This one we're envisioning could be more of a rentable space potentially, could potentially also be used as a stage for concerts if that was desired. So just kind of a zoom in of some of these things that we're proposing. Again, here's that community green space with some cafe seating area, lighting, but again, just creating that central community area that currently doesn't exist. Shifting the play area and splash pad so it's nestled up into that tree canopy and engaging that open lawn, and really creating this kind of open, informal practice area. Again, in regards to the parking area, also incorporating porous paving. So this is a green parking lot. it feels like it fits in a park. It's not just a sea of asphalt that belongs in a Walmart. So just some precedent images for some of the ideas that we're talking about. So that kind of community space, that cafe plaza, this is sort of an image of the look and feel. It's meant to be warm and inviting. It's meant to make you want to stay and hang out and talk to your fellow Mellon Park users. The Overlook Terrace area, it can be rented for a birthday party. It can be used just to watch games, or it could be potentially where a stage could be set up if there's a Juneteenth event or a concert or whatever the community wants. This is a kind of an image of that informal practice area. It's not meant to have football games. It's not big enough. It's really just a flat lawn space that has a lot of flexible use. And then terrace, kind of what that terrace seating areas in and around these spaces, what that could look like to really maximize the ability for people to sit. There's not a lot of amenities out at Mellon Park today. And then in terms of the play areas, this is kind of the look and feel that we're thinking. This is an arboretum, and we think that's kind of exciting and something that can be used as inspiration. So making sure that these are vertical play elements that can get kids up into the tree canopy, some nature-themed climbing elements, things that just kind of resonate, that look like they feel and belong in an arboretum, and similar to these splash pad elements, taking inspiration from that really cool asset, that real cool amenity that Mellon Park has become. And making it something interesting and something that feels like it belongs in that space. So I think we're doing okay for time, but I don't know. We're quickly going to break out into breakout rooms. We have about 10 minutes. So we'll kind of separate it out with some PPC folks, as well as Claudia Saladin, who's one of our consultants to facilitate. And really all we want to know is, at this point, what do you like? What don't you like? And what are we missing? If you don't get a chance to speak, that's okay. We'll have other opportunities in the presentation. There's also a survey online that you can fill out to get your input in, or you can just shoot me an email. So I think we'll take a pause now. We'll do some breakout rooms and people can kind of give some initial reactions, and then we'll come back together and go over the south half. So without ado.
Thanks, Brandon. I'm going to open the rooms now. And I just posted the link in the chat to the Engage page that has the survey with the questions that we'll be going over in the breakout rooms too. So I will open those now. And you should have got a little pop-up to join your breakout room, so you can just select that. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. Hey everyone. So this is, you didn't get the pop-up, we're just in the main room and I'll be leading this breakout room. So I'm going to start by just sharing the presentation slides. And I can have these up and then we can kind of go through them, and if you have feedback or questions or concerns, I'll take notes and then relay that back to Brandon. So let me share my screen here. All right, make it a little bigger. So let's see. Okay. I also am not able to see the chat as I'm sharing my screen. So if you'd like to say anything, I just ask that you unmute, please. Yeah. Does anyone have any feedback about the north side slides that we were just going over? Questions, concerns?
Thanks for enlarging it a bit, because I was struggling to read the legend, and if you could make it even a little bit bigger, I'm sort of curious as to what all of those things say.
Yeah, I'll do my best to, how is this okay? I can make it a little bigger, but I'll have to kind of scroll around the picture a bit.
Definitely better.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So there's currently a shelter and there's porta potties, but there's going to be a building that has actual bathrooms. Will there be other park shelters as well?
So there on the north side, actually, there's right where this number 3 is there.
Right. That's a shelter.
Yeah, I believe that Yeah, so this is kind of going to be like a concession space and like a restroom building. The current park shelter is kind of like, well, it's right, like, so this is the entrance to the park and the current park shelter is like
It's right about there. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is going to be either if there's going to be in like that same shelter or if it's going to be kind of two like smaller shelters near each other. I do believe that those will be kind of in the same space. They're just not shown on this drawing here because that's kind of more, I guess, like nitty gritty detail. But yeah, there will be.
Yeah, why would they be close together? If they're close together, then events at the two of them will interfere with each other sonically, acoustically.
So the idea of if they're going to be, and I can double check with Brandon on this, but I do believe that the if they're going to be closer together, it's going to be like kind of two like smaller shelters that would be kind of used like for like the same event versus like one bigger shelter with a bunch of tables. And
that's weird.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not positive on that. I'll have to double check with
Brandon. It's just odd that the shelters aren't included here. But yeah, it seems like shelters will be more useful to more people if they're separated, because what they are is they're shelter in case it rains and protection for the tables and things, which is, you know, a wonderful service to have in a park. But if you have two of them cheek by jowl, that's just stupid. It seems to me.
Yeah.
And I'm part of a choir that when weather has been good has often met there in Mellon Park, and we will be by the shelter if it's available because there's seating there and shelter if it rains. But we don't go to the extent of reserving it. So if there's other people there, we're out somewhere in that open area under the trees or around the sort of toward Penn Avenue there. But having a party going on in one and having a choir or another party going on another that are close by is just totally counterproductive.
Yeah, so I'm hearing like multiple shelters that are large enough to accommodate groups in different areas
and far apart. And small shelters can also be very nice to have. I mean, I'd say 4 small shelters and 1 big shelter and 3 little shelters instead of 2 big shelters. Would make more sense because often groups are small and don't need anything like the space, but occasionally there might be big groups.
Yes, I'm making note of that. Thanks for speaking up about that.
And I agree that, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead and finish.
No, you go.
I'm on a new topic, so you finish.
Go to the new topic. I was go.
Trees. One of the things that the advisory panel asked to be included in today's presentation was a labeling of existing trees that are being proposed to be taken down and new trees proposed for planting, and which trees are Arboretum specimen trees. Is that in a future slide, or am I missing a label, or how is that shown in these diagrams?
Yeah, thanks, Viv. I do believe that's going to be later in the presentation.
Okay.
And it's not in this, obviously, it's not in the ones that we were just looking over, but I'm fairly sure Brandon has, I'm not positive, but I'm fairly sure Brandon has that graphic.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Viv.
Caitlin, it's Rin Babson. I have a very quick question. I was asked, members of the Colonial Dames here in Western Pennsylvania evidently donated some sort of statue or something along Penn Avenue a few years ago, and they're concerned with all the reconfiguration, where it's going to be moved to, making sure that it's not too close to a highway where it could be taken and not too close to sidewalks that could get salt sprayed that could impact it. And I can't tell from these plans where it is.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Do you know if they have also reached out to Brandon by any chance?
If they what?
Do you know if they've reached, did they just reach out to you, or do you know if they've reached
They
out to
did,
Brandon?
no, they just reached out to me. They knew I was going to these meetings and
Okay.
said, could I just ask the question? They're just concerned about what's going to happen to it.
Sure, yeah, I'll relay
And
that
I
to
don't-
Brandon and get back.
I hate to show my ignorance, but I don't know if Penn Avenue is part of the Forbes Road, whatever it is. It's a historic road, so it's a historic monument.
Okay,
And
Is
I
it
think
the marker that used to be further down on Penn Avenue around, like between Dallas and Linden on Penn, and got moved into the park? It's, it's a replica of a tree stump, and it has a plaque on it. Would that possibly be the one that they're referring to?
I'm not sure. I can check. It sounds like a good possibility. And I myself,
I'm sorry, I should have included originally that the marker that's on it, I believe, says something about the Forbes Road.
That's okay. So that could make sense. I don't know exactly when they paid for it, but they were concerned when they heard things were being reconfigured. And honestly, it's hard to park on Penn Avenue, so I myself haven't gone to search for it yet.
yeah, sure, definitely. No, that's a valid concern. So yeah, I'll pass that on to Brandon and get back to you about any information about that, or maybe we can connect with that group.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Move the legend back up here.
Caitlin,
Yes. Yeah, iPad 6, what's your name?
Debbie Clark. Hi. A place to see how they built the shelters that they did a pretty good job is Monroeville Park in Monroeville, the big park. It's really big. It has an amphitheater, but on one side, they have a large parking lot that they use for farmers markets. And then off to the side, there are several shelters. One of them is very, very large. My book group has shared it once with another group on the other corner. But most groups are not really large. And so if it were, my thought was this should be a separate. There should be two separate shelters here versus this extremely large one. And then across from that, there are two smaller ones. They all share a common yard, for games or whatever. But if one, like the woman formerly said, if we want to practice the choir here, somebody's having a birthday party next door, it won't work. So maybe the smaller separate are better for most groups. And also convenience of people who are handicapped. It makes a difference for handicapped and baby strollers, that people can access to their best ability. But if you looked out took a ride out to that park, you could see, what I mean.
Yeah.
Just adding that for smaller shelters.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for adding that. Our breakout rooms will be closing in about 5 seconds. But as we mentioned previously, if there was something on your mind that you didn't get a chance to share for the north side, I encourage you to fill out the survey on our Engage page. Stop. I'm just going to share. Is everyone back? That's okay. Okay. Thanks, Brandon. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I think next what we'd like to do, let me get this presentation back up, is we'll kind of just quickly report out what the room said, and then we have a little poll we'd like everyone to fill out if you could. So I'll start with some of the comments that our room discussed. One was a suggestion for solar panels in the parking area, similar to how Frick Park operates. We thought was a really good suggestion. There's a lot of lighting demands that we're proposing, so some way to offset the grid would be important. And another thing we discussed was the fact that Mellon Park is an arboretum, so are there ways to make that more known? Can we do a an arboretum center, or is there a way to use the arboretum and coordinate with local community groups, Friends of Mellon Park, et cetera, to get people out and engaged in the park early with maps or something interactive, to really let people know this is an arboretum, one of 6 in the East End, and it's an amenity that should be enjoyed. Who else had a room?
I will quickly just share that there was comments around making sure that the folks that utilize the spaces like the football field and need it the most still have that opportunity, and concern around equity, looking to the future and using less resources and using more native plants on both sides of the park. There were questions about parking areas and if green infrastructure and stormwater management will be used, such as permeable pavement, and if there will be opportunities to employ solar energy, like you were saying, Brandon. What kinds of renewable energies will we be able to utilize for new buildings that might require heat or air conditioning? And which of the paths are going to be accommodating vehicular traffic for outside of just, for maintenance crews to be there. There's a lot of new pathways being proposed. What are their intended uses? And re-envisioning the maintenance. So upkeeping the hardscaping with people power. And just a comment about Westinghouse Park should be thought about as we plan for Mellon Park, because it is such a nearby park. And I mentioned that Westinghouse Park will be going through its own master planning process too. So thank you.
I guess I'll jump in. Our group, there was a lot of support for the idea of the PED only signal phase. People thought that was a good idea. There was also one suggestion that we had is that since this is an arboretum, like, can we add like tags or other signage so that people can sort of learn about the trees, like what species there are and so forth. For the playground, people really like the idea of it being sort of using natural materials and sort of calming colors, not like bright pinks and reds, and sort of they like the Precedent Images. There was some concern that was raised that particularly on 5th and to some extent on Penn, that cyclists use the sidewalk and are not respectful always of pedestrians. And so if there's a way to bring more cycle traffic into the park and that those paths are wide enough and accommodate use by both cyclists and pedestrians. And there was some discussion about the 5th and Penn intersection and sort of realigning that crosswalk a little bit in terms of how the crosswalk relates to the stop bar and where people want to cross. And then there was also a concern raised that the rectangular field would get a lot of use, and so it might be that it would be really hard to keep grass on it. So about what the strategies are for protecting that resource. I think I hit all the key points.
All good feedback that we will have to take into consideration.
I'll just quickly, our conversation was about park shelters a lot and kind of places to sit and gather under covered areas. So the idea of having 2 shelters or 2 or more kind of like spread out throughout the park so that different groups could kind of gather and use them all, and whether it's like a birthday party or a singing group or book club or of the like, they're able to all be able to use it simultaneously. And then also there was a comment that Monroeville Park, they have different shelters that would be kind of good to model after. And then a question about the in Arboretum. Do we have a slide about the existing trees and trees that are, okay, yeah. So that'll be coming up. And then one more comment about a statue along Penn Ave and concern about if that is going to be moved during the process or if that's going to be staying where it is. That it was donated by a group called the Colonial Dames.
Yes, I'll answer that quickly. As of now, we're proposing to kind of keep all those existing art pieces where they are. So that. Do we have any other groups, or do we want to do the poll quickly?
I do have a group really quickly that I will go over. So overall, it seemed like we had some really good and high hopes for the park plan. However, some of our concerns had to deal with the neighbors surrounding the park and how they would possibly deal with the sound that does come from events and things like that going on. We did have a question if there would be a fence around the entire perimeter of the park. There was some concern about, people or children getting into the streets because we do know Fifth Avenue is heavily trafficked. And then there was a suggestion to add wayfinding or mileage estimates for the cyclists throughout the park and directions, getting to Shady Side. And then we had some suggestions again with the solar panels, adding them to the parking lot and the lighting system. And then we did have some questions about pickleball and if it would be possible to maybe add another court and if the park itself would actually be ADA accessible. So I think that covers most of the things that we talked about.
Okay, I'll answer a couple quickly because we have to keep moving, but no to the fence around the entire edge of the park. We have reasons for that, especially because the fence, at least on the south side of the park, while it's historic and beautiful, is off-putting to some people. They don't recognize that they can walk in. So there are ways to mitigate children being able to get to Fifth Avenue easily, which we'll show with some vegetation changes, et cetera. We'll show that in a future presentation. And I had what I was going to answer. Oh, accessibility. We have another slide kind of showing accessibility, but yes, that's in the forefront of our minds to make sure that the park is as accessible as possible. So real quick, I think we want to do a very quick poll where we're going to ask you to pick the 3 kind of projects that we just kind of discussed, the improvements we discussed, that they're the biggest priorities to you. Whatever you like the most, so that I'll just read them off. So that's improved park entrances and pedestrian access, parking improvements, community green space and plaza space, the play area and splash pad, the basketball courts, the pickleball court, the informal rectangular practice field, upgrading the ball fields, lighting improvements, and then just general upgraded amenities. Pick kind of the 3 things that are the most important so we can start to understand what everyone's priorities are. We'll give everyone kind of a minute to go through there. And to be clear, some things will have to be prioritized based on constructability, sequencing, et cetera, but it's helpful to us to know what are the key issues for everyone, to make sure that when we kind of map out how this goes, your input is taken into account, not just budget or constructability, et cetera. Give people a few more moments, maybe like another 20 seconds. And if you don't have the time to do it now, you can also do it on the Engage PGH website, as well as we have a very short survey and the same exact information. We can get your input that way too. Should we end the poll just so we can keep moving? Because we're a little over time. And
All ended.
All ended. All right. Well, thank you all for filling that out. Some very cool. Some of the stuff, I think it follows what we've heard in the past. Pedestrian access seems to be very important to people. A community space, making sure the splash pad is taken into account, the play area, amenities and lighting improvements. Yeah, that we've heard that a lot through this process. So good to see that that's still the case. So moving on to the south side and try and do this as quickly as possible. So again, improving access to the south side of the park was hugely important. So one, that includes creating new entrances. We're showing an entrance off the corner of 5th and Shady Avenue, as well as an entrance as basically as close as we could get it to the corner of 5th and Beechwood, recognizing that some people are going to cross the street and come this way to get into the park. This actually aligns with old driveway entrance from the Darcy residents that used to be here. But again, making this park more accessible in that regard, as well as, again, using these pedestrian or these entry plazas at all of the existing entrances that begin to communicate to a user that this is a park, this is how you get in, this is a map, this is how you get to where you need to go. Especially important on this half of the park where there's a lot of confusion. It's a little more ambiguous. Is this a park or is this private space? Another big thing about access is we looked at trying to do more traffic calming on 5th Avenue. Can we drop a lane? Can we put it on a road diet to make 5th Avenue a more pedestrian friendly experience? And the answer is really no, not without some significant traffic impacts to the city. So that probably wouldn't be acceptable. So what we looked at doing is using Beechwood Ave as really being kind of the connecting road, the connecting park road essentially between the two halves of the park. So there's less traffic. It's got more tree cover. It kind of feels more passive and park-like already. So really leaning into that to make this the way that people want to get from one half of the park to the other. So that includes, these improvements would include bump outs and safer pedestrian crossings. They may include speed humps. We're showing them, but that's really a DOMI decision if they're necessary. There's more study that needs to go into that to prove that they're needed. But the other big thing we're doing here is to make a change at the corner of Reynolds and Beechwood. Right now, that road kind of runs straight through. It's sort of dangerous both for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. People often blow through that stop sign. So teeing that road up, making this a safer pedestrian connection, and actually connecting people to Lyndhurst Green as well, and kind of creating this park road, almost this little network of green open space, using that as our main connection to help increase access. That's a major change that we're proposing to this plan. Again, the idea of changing the parking structure, reducing it to making this a one-way loop with some raised crossings so it's safer for pedestrians to enter this road or enter the park from the side, move through these parking areas. As we've discussed in previous parts or previous presentations, a lot of people can perceive this to be the edge of Mellon Park, where the fence line is and kind of the back of the walled garden, but it includes this parking area, all of these buildings. So making this more permeable, making people, make it an edge, make it part of the park again, was an important piece. And then kind of the campus area that we're calling it, and integrating that a bit better into the park and making it feel more part of the park instead of their own little places. So one of those changes includes, the existing cobble drive that's there now, kind of turning that into the sort of the maintenance and loading access for both where DPW's maintenance yard operates, as well as Phipps Garden Center. So orienting their loading areas, their access to this, and keeping it out of sort of the main park area. In addition to changing the entrance of where the Phipps main entrance, the garden center is currently located, and this is something we discussed with the garden center, to be on the parking lot side instead of on this aisle. So it's much more clear how you get into the garden center, and then expanding the porch area on the back by removing the loading area and giving more programmable space for the garden center. Similarly, potentially expanding this area where this is the SCAFE building where Center for the Arts and Media is currently located. Can we add an outdoor classroom into that area that is kind of currently used there now, really expanding on that ability to facilitate educational programs and classroom programs, as well as a similar approach to the Marshall building where City Parks is currently located, or really kind of cleaning up where dumpsters are, and also along those lines, making better connections, not just through these buildings into the park, but between the buildings themselves. So really kind of strengthening and sort of knitting together this part of the park, cleaning up those loading areas and those dumpsters, things you don't want to cross, and really making this feel more like a campus environment that's a part of Mellon Park and not this separate place. Some other things we're proposing are to enhance some of the existing spaces that work really well. So this area we're calling where the old Mellon estate was located, the Melon Lawn, generally keeping the shape, but maybe adding some areas where we can start to organize where tables and benches and seating are located instead of kind of scattered around like they currently are. We're proposing actually highlighting where the Mellon's front porch used to be, where they would greet visitors from the old porte cochere that's still there, making that a seating area with picnic tables, lounge seating, etc., but bringing back some of that historic elements. And then adding a pathway loop and another gathering seating area at what we're calling the Frew Knoll. This is where the Frew estate used to be located, but if you're ever out on this open space, it's kind of a second plateau, arguably the best views of the city in Mellon Park, also a direct visual connection to park on the north side. So really kind of enhancing that, defining that better, making it accessible so people of all abilities can come to these areas. And then also using these improvements to help sort of manage and define where event space needs to be. Events currently occur on these areas. It's ill-defined, it's hard for the city to enforce. So trying to set up some pathways where people can, set up their events, where it's very clear how events should be run and maintained, is something that we're trying to do with this plan as well. Also restoring and rehabilitating, and in some cases reconstructing historic elements. So like we mentioned, restoring the Terrace Garden to be somewhat historically accurate, bringing back some historic features that are gone. So that includes the Olmsted, what we're calling the Olmsted Rain Garden now, as well as this used to be the Mellon Children's Playhouse, bringing that back as a shelter space, and re-engaging the chicken coop building and bringing back that kind of historic aspect and giving it some new life. And I'm going the wrong direction. And then just kind of zooming into what these improvements are. So when we're talking about the Melon Lawn, this is that kind of reinterpreted porch area where you might have some picnic tables, some seating opportunities that can be organized there, but kind of bringing it back, that historical element again to sort of tie it back into the Terrace Garden. What we're showing here could be just an expanded paving area that could have picnic tables for the majority of the time, but that might be where the stage gets set up for Beethoven, Bach, and Brunch and other events rather than in the lawn space to try and protect lawn area, protect the landscape. And similarly, that strategy could be used on the Frew Knoll too, if events were to take place there. This could be an area for staging. The pathway could be used to get trucks and vehicles in and out. But again, protecting the integrity of these existing spaces. On the Terrace Garden, we would propose, kind of historically bringing it back, but maybe with some contemporary changes to it. Keeping the Shakespeare herb garden that the Herb Society has been maintaining for years, keeping that space. That seems like a really great use of that space, and that shouldn't be something that we propose to change. But maybe on this upper terrace, bringing back some more historical planting design, but potentially upgrading it to using native plants only, and sort of reimagining it, repurposing that way. And then some of these other areas, this is that chicken coop, that's small. If you've been out there next to the Marshall building, that small, squat, kind of dilapidated white building. This is where the Mellons had their agricultural garden. So bringing that aspect back. It could have a kind of a community urban agricultural area. And what we're proposing here is not necessarily a community garden plot where you can just sign up and get a plot. It's more, this is really meant to be more of an educational opportunity. It could be a place where a nonprofit runs to teach, food insecure neighborhoods how to garden. There's a number of nonprofits in the city that do that. But this could be kind of the space that they run that program out of. Something that was brought up in the survey is introducing a children's sensory garden with maybe some really kind of passive nature play elements, but sort of a lower activity play element for children on this half of the park. Could be an exciting thing, and kind of linking those together with just kind of a informal lawn area with lounge seating that another place where people can just kind of hang out and relax. And then the building itself, using one half of it, restoring it or reconstructing it, using one half to kind of support the garden program. The other half can be used and converted into public restrooms on this half of the park. There are no restrooms open to the public on this half of the park. And then maybe the middle piece of the building could be an open air pavilion to again provide some sheltered seating area that currently doesn't exist on this half of the park. And this is just an image of that Olmsted rain garden. So bringing back the historic design and the historic intent and integrity of that frog pond that the Olmsted brothers had designed, but updating it to be a rain garden, something that's ornamental, that's beautiful, but serves a purpose and doesn't hold water. Rain gardens get wet, but they drain out by 72 hours or less. So kind of bringing back that element, but having a more contemporary use where it could help provide stormwater benefits for the park. And just some of the precedents to kind of go along with that. This is an image on the left of the historic image of the Terrace Garden, restoring some of that garden space, restoring that paving, but maybe we reinterpret the planting palette to be native plants, but done in a formal design. This is an image of that Olmsted Brothers frog pond. Again, bringing back the historic integrity of that space, but upgrading it with an ornamental rain garden design that doesn't hold water, but kind of matches the look and feel of what the Olmsted brothers were intending. And then going over to that chicken coop area, I think when we talk about vegetable gardens or community gardens, people kind of have that idea of these messy plots. But I think this image shows that it can be done very tastefully in a way that is actually appropriate for the setting in Mellon Park, this kind of historic park setting. That would be a good value to the park. This breezeway area kind of showing how that could work between two buildings, as well as this is just an image of sort of that children's garden, an informal nature play space. And again, it's kind of low intensity play, but it's an element that's somewhat missing on this half of the park. And we ran through that quickly for time, so there might be more questions when we jump into the breakout rooms, but I apologize if that was rushed, but let's try and jump into the breakout rooms and we can talk in a little more detail, and hopefully we have some time at the end of the presentation to talk some more as well if there are specific questions.
Thanks, Brandon. Opening the rooms now, and I'm also posting the link in the chat again for Engage. So just like before, if you saw the little pop-up on your screen to join your breakout room, you can get on in there. We'll get started with my group. All right, here we are on the south side. So just like before, I'm not able to see the chat while screen sharing. So if you have any feedback, concerns, questions, comments, feel free to just unmute.
I feel really concerned on this side that about the amount of concrete that's being put down, whether that's in new pathways or seating areas. I just feel so strongly that green space needs to be preserved, not only for our well-being, but for this issue of climate change that threatens us. I just don't think we can afford to lose a tree or a blade of grass. And any of this building just requires dredging and pushing and rearranging, and just all the concrete that I'm seeing is really unsettling for me.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, somebody asked about that in the chat, and it was mentioned that there would be a later slide that showed which of the paths are existing and which are new. And are the dark green trees new and the light green trees are existing? Is that the idea of the overall diagram?
Yes, I do believe that the green trees are
new trees being added.
Put in.
I think there's a slide that will speak to that as well. Brandon may have a slide that speaks to existing greenery versus proposed new additional greenery.
And is there greenery to be removed is, I guess, the question that Rachel is driving at.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on what the final, I think that's what we at the Conservancy and the city forestry team and everybody wants to minimize. So I would think that the objective would be to not remove any trees. It's hard to say where this will land, but that's high on our priority list anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of new building. The north side is getting all switched around, but the south side here, I'm not seeing a lot of new buildings with the exception of that thing with the garden storage and bathrooms down by the garden area, which overall seems like a lovely thing. I can't remember what squat building they're talking about.
So I'm also referring to the paths, though, to the new paths, like the new entrances and paths that are going to get laid over the grass, the new fruit knoll. I mean, this is a pretty small green space, and it feels like a lot is getting packed into it.
You're describing it as concrete. Are they meant to be concrete? If they are asphalt, could they be permeable if they are really necessary? Has thought been given to permeable paving of the new and the old paths? Presumably they'll probably be updating the old paths. Could that all be changed to permeable?
I would think, yes, that has been discussed. Brandon would be much better to answer that question than I, but at every turn that we kind of take when we think about additional accessible pathways, we do think about permeable surfaces, right? So it's hard to say. I have no idea what the cost of that is versus asphalt or concrete, but to help manage stormwater, those are key considerations. So he thinks about that a lot for sure. I can't speak to which pathways in particular might be really appropriate for those materials versus others, or if they all could be.
Yeah, and restoring or rebuilding the rain garden down the hill there might help too.
I have some concerns about just the construction process in general. I know that a lot of the pathways that are being proposed are intended to make access to the park better for people who have mobility impairments, not necessarily just those who use wheelchairs, but those are some steep hills. So I know from a previous meeting that was part of the intent behind some of the new paths. But my concern about construction is the process. Even if you're constructing something that is truly green infrastructure, like a rain garden, what's going to be the process of building that? Is there heavy equipment that's going to be brought in and out over those tree roots that line the path? How much damage is going to be done to the trees in the process of doing this construction? And I think I'm particularly sensitized to that regarding stormwater projects, because some recent and ongoing stormwater projects just a few blocks away from here are doing a lot of damage to trees. And there's heavy equipment being parked over the roots and compressing them. And, there's a lot of damage that gets done in the process of construction. And I know these are concepts, and maybe the process is considered to be a detail, but this is an arboretum. And I had asked, and I think later we're going to see a diagram that shows which trees are specimen trees. And even if they're not specimen trees, if we have mature trees, we should be giving attention to where we place things and how the process of what we're constructing is going to impact those trees. You can't replace a 50-year-old tree tomorrow.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Viv, for bringing up that concern. And I think we're also definitely very concerned about that and are making sure that's a huge priority. So, but yeah, I definitely taking note of that, and we'll pass that on to the team as well.
Caitlin. Oh.
Yep.
Caitlin.
Yes.
I have another question. I'm just looking at this plan. As you know, I'm the chair of the Western Pennsylvania unit of the Herb Society of America.
Mm-hmm.
And about 6 of us were over in the Elizabethan garden yesterday, assessing and planning for spring. It was a beautiful day, but I'm looking at this and thinking we have sometimes 20 or more people working in that garden from approximately 9:30 or 10 until 3, 1 or 2 days a week trying to maintain it. And I'm looking at where the bathrooms are being planned. As far as I can tell, they're pretty far away from that garden. You know, is one concern. I know at one point when you talked about the little children's playhouse up above it, there was a discussion. I thought that there might be some bathrooms in there. And I'm just raising that question. Just while you're still thinking things out. And then the other thing is the access roads to get in. We've never had a place for any of our tools. So we come with wheelbarrows and buckets and shovels and rakes. And some of our members are more senior members, but lately we've been hauling them up from Beechwood Boulevard. But we sometimes have always been able to park on that path going down, you know, to unload a little bit better. Would that ability still be there? I know you said limited use, but I'm just thinking of, you know, how do we do our work? And I'm just raising those questions right now while you're still planning, that those are things that would be helpful to us.
Mm-hmm.
And to master gardeners who also come in and help maintain those gardens.
Yeah.
As well. We've always driven up that road.
So I'm not sure if the idea is to limit like public access, like general public access to using that road, and then perhaps there could be like situations in which different groups would have access, but I'll bring that question up for sure.
It's a question of how the access is going to be restrained. Will there be bollards? Will there be a chain? Will there be a gate with just the pedestrian side open? Which is not, I mean, it's in theory possible to go down, but then you still have to get back up if the gate is closed.
Right. Thank you.
I don't have the impression it's heavily used by the public. I think it's been used by people who are doing things in those gardens or at the garden center.
That road was just given a name and has signage now. And it is becoming a concern of how it's like there are people that turn onto it not knowing that it's, you know, not a regular road.
It's kind of obscure to get into. I mean, I've gone past it by mistake. You seem to have popped out.
Thank you, everyone. So quick 10 minutes. I'll pass it back to Brandon now.
Okay, we'll try and do some really quick reporting out just because we have a little bit more to cover and we're running out of time. So I think a couple things our group talked about, the Terrace Garden, making sure that the Herb Society has that place that they've been maintaining for so long, and preserving that was important. But that upper terrace, being a little more creative about the planting, getting rid of those yews that are there. Could that be lawn space to help facilitate kind of gathering and events a little better, or just native planting that's respectful of the historic design integrity? We also talked about kind of the overlook seating areas, both on the Fruit Lawn and the Melon Lawn. You know, the intention are those are porous pavement with seating. It's meant to be a seating area 90% of the time, and may support a stage 10% of the time if there's an event that allows it, but that's really the intent. We also talked about signage, the importance of signage. You know, even if there's an event or people are trying to visit the park, nobody knows how to get there, and the black gates on this part of this half of the park don't help break down that barrier. So making sure that that's, you know, a priority. And then Beechwood Boulevard is a speedway, so making sure we can get some traffic calming in there, and soon would be an important improvement priority. Who's next?
I'll just jump in here and say concerns around too much event space, and you know, with that, maintenance and management and enforcement of events that are happening in the park is a really critical concern. Making sure that there's a comprehensive approach to parking and transit, encouraging people to walk or take public transit to the park. Signage came up as well. And then the connectivity between the buildings, and making sure that there's a thoughtful strategy that goes into how you connect them, and you know, make sure that those things are a follow-up to this action plan discussion. Yep, a lot of the same stuff you said too, Brandon. Next.
Okay, I'll jump in. People like the new entrance at 5th and Shady, that there was a more organized way to get into the park. We had some discussion and questions about, you know, ensuring that we have accessible routes through the park, like that you can get from the far south entrance on Beechwood up to up to the new entrance at Shady and 5th in an accessible manner. And just generally a concern about accessibility. We had a question about events, whether this idea of creating more event space was because we wanted to be able to host larger events in Shenley Park. I'm sorry, in Mellon Park. Wow. And then I think those were the main things that we talked about.
Just some concerns about the amount of concrete going in with new pavements, and if permeable pavement for the pathways could be something. Concerned about trees being removed on the south side of the park, as well as the construction process in general and how that will affect existing trees. Bathroom placement in relation to the Terrace Garden. It seems kind of far, and if there's a situation in which that could be closer, and then the access road off of Beechwood, and who can have access to that, and how that access would be managed.
All right, and then I'll hop in here last. Just some of the main concerns that our group had was definitely the maintenance of the park and concerning the terrace. So more about like who will take care of it, how often, because I know that was a concern in the past. And then they were also worried about too many paths breaking up the park. It just seemed like a lot of concrete, not as much, open space. And then as a question, we were also wondering, would you be able to clarify the tree colors on the map? We were just wondering which ones were existing trees or which ones are new, or if they're just a general outline of the trees in the park.
Yeah, I can do that. We have a diagram that we're gonna show. We'll try and breeze through them really quick, but we can show that. Do we want to quickly do a poll as fast as possible? And if people want to stay on later, that'd be great. We'll try and go through it as quick as we can. Or why don't we, while we're getting ready for the poll, we'll make sure we have the opportunity to do that. But why don't we run through the presentation a little more? Because we do want to talk about stormwater, which is important, as well as some of these other site diagrams, which might answer some questions. Claudia, do you want to?
Sure. As some of you may know, Mellon Park is located in the A42 sewer shed, or it's also known as the Negley Run sewer shed, which includes large parts of Larimer, Homewood, Lincoln, Leamington, Balmoral, and parts of Highland Park. And it is one of the PWSA's priority sewer sheds, meaning it is a very significant contributor of combined sewer overflow to the Allegheny River. And we are about 7.5% of the sewer shed. So it's the sewer shed total is is 2,800 plus acres, and we're about 220 acres. So we can make a contribution to improving the condition in the storage shed. Obviously, we can't fix the storage shed entirely because we are a very small piece. If we go on to the next slide. So this is just focusing in again on that Mellon Park Basin. So the largest orange area is what we are calling the Mellon Park Basin. And that is basically everything that is upstream of Mellon Park and flows through Mellon Park. The Mellon Park parcels themselves are about 32 acres. That larger Mellon Park Basin, as we said, is about 220 acres. The smaller orange area is the area that we believe could reasonably be managed in the park. So topographically, it would be relatively easy to bring that water into or close to the park and manage it in a more sustainable way. And one of the things that we used in terms of how we're sizing stormwater pieces is we looked at what's called the 95% runoff event, which is basically 95% of the storms that we have are this size or smaller. And which is 1.5 inches over 24 hours. And the runoff that we get from that, from the park itself, it's about 220,000 gallons. From that smaller sort of managed subcatchment, it's about 1.8 million gallons. And that entire area contributes about 8.8 million gallons of runoff in a 95 percentile event. And so if we go on to the final slide, so there was a lot of analysis that was done in terms of where to put pieces and what we can do. But basically we came up, the strategy that we're proposing is about what we're showing on the plan in both the dark blue and the light blue is about 2.2 million gallons of storage, which will result in an annual reduction of the CSO. So the annual reduction in the amount of combined stormwater and untreated sewage that goes into the Allegheny River by about 9.4 million gallons annually, and will also contribute to reducing downstream flooding because we will be putting less stormwater into the sewer, during a rain event. And so it's a combination of underground storage and surface pieces. And the idea is that each of these nodes would be separate, so they can be constructed, the construction of them can be coordinated with the construction of park amenities. So when we're ready, for example, you see we have a large underground storage area. The dark blue is underground storage. We have large underground storage under the outfield of field 1. And the idea is when we're ready to do improvements to field 1, improvements to the drainage, that's when that underground storage would go in. Similarly, we have storage under the rectangular fields, under the basketball courts, under the entire parking lot. Brandon mentioned porous paving. That's a way for the water to get into sort of some underground storage, but looking at putting it there. And then again, on the south side of the park, we're looking where we're doing improvements to the parking lots or modifications to the parking lots. We'd be doing porous paving and underground storage in those locations. The rain garden at the Olmsted Pond would be another area, and this was a question that came up in my breakout group. We're not proposing any other underground storage in the vegetated area of the park. It's just the surface rain Olmsted Pond and then the underground storage under the parking lots. And then we are also, because the plan is proposing to make some improvements to Beechwood Boulevard in terms of traffic bump outs and sort of protected traffic protected parking lanes, that we would do, again, underground storage in those parking lanes. And also the newly constructed bump outs could also be rain gardens that would receive stormwater. But the idea was to no tree impacts and coordinated with the park improvements and phased with them.
Right. Thank you, Claudia. We'll try and run through a few more quick diagrams, which I think will be helpful, and then we can try and wrap up. I know we're kind of out of time. So along the lines of stormwater, making sure we're not losing trees. A lot of those questions about what trees are staying, which are being removed. These lighter green trees are all the existing trees to remain. These light blue trees are actually the specimen trees that are identified as part of the arboretum. They were part of the arboretum application. All of the green trees you see are proposed tree plantings. And these smaller red trees, kind of pink trees, are existing trees that would have to be removed in order to accommodate proposed improvements. Really none on the south side because we're not actually changing footprints drastically. The north side, where we're doing a lot more work, we do have to lose some, but we've limited that pretty significantly. None of them are fair. None of them are the largest canopy trees that are there. And as you can see, we're planting the idea over 400 trees incrementally over a long period of time to replace that canopy loss, to make sure that this stays an arboretum. Vegetation, changing that up a little bit. Most of Mellon Park is either lawn or pavement, and then there's a very small percentage that's planting. Trying to adjust those ratios a little bit for areas that aren't being used that well. So these light green areas, that's typical mown lawn that you see there now. The next darker shade of green is what we're calling kind of a green verge. These are, we're locating these in areas that just aren't really usable, especially right next to Fifth Avenue or Penn Avenue, places that people don't want to be. The intention being those are really a no-mow fescue, maybe with some forbs and wildflowers sprinkled through it, but kind of maintaining that pastoral green character that the landscape design calls for, but reducing maintenance requirements and maintenance load on DPW. We're also proposing it naturalized planting areas, really areas that are allowed to grow and be a little more natural and have more economic and biodiverse habitat. Those are located kind of at the edges of the park, again, in parts that aren't usable, as well as some steep slopes that are just frankly very hard to maintain and mow. We're seeing some of that happen already. If you go to the ball field, the outfield, some of that area is already sort of being naturalized because it's hard to mow. And then ornamental plantings, expanding that as well, whether it's rain gardens or different types of garden plantings. And then bringing in impermeable paving, which currently isn't on site. And while it looks like we've added pavement, this is actual doing the quantities. There's a 15% reduction in impervious surfacing based on our plans, as well as a 5% reduction in mown lawn area. It's not a ton, but any little bit helps when it comes to maintenance and increasing stormwater, et cetera. This is really quickly just talking about park connectivity. The blue circles are existing entrances. The red circles are kind of our proposed new entrances that currently don't exist. The blue pathway lines are existing circulation routes, existing pathways, and the pink lines are kind of our new and our proposed pathways, existing circulation. So really on the south side of the park, we're really focusing on knitting, most of those improvements are knitting that campus area back into the park. And on the north side, it's establishing circulation that currently doesn't exist because the heart of the park is a parking lot. So providing a pedestrian experience that's not there is kind of the goal of circulation. And then from an accessibility standpoint, these dark blue lines represent paths we can feasibly make accessible per ADA code. It's a lot easier on the north side because it doesn't have as much grade change or historic kind of design protections as the south side does in terms of extant historic features, but we are improving pedestrian accessibility overall, especially from parking areas getting up to the knoll. These kind of furry blue lines are pathways that are not greater than 8%. They're not less than 5%, but they're also not greater than 8%. They technically don't meet code, but in terms of the wild scale of inaccessibility, they're a little bit more palatable than some of the other pathways. And these kind of gray lines are just non-accessible routes but they are historic and there's not much we can do to change them. And the green lines here are just showing that shared use path, which, by the way, accessibility guidelines are kind of the recommendations for shared use pathways in terms of slope. So those would be accessible as well. Really quick diagram just showing how amenities are located, kind of the types of seating, types of tables, et cetera, that we're talking about. The blue is seating areas. The purple is kind of tables, places where you can gather, maybe eat. The yellow dots are trash receptacles, and the red are bike racks. Really, we're just trying to show quickly how amenities are being dispersed throughout the park in a better way than they are now. They tend to be clustered in certain areas now. So a lot of the park is unused. So we're really trying to spread that use out to encourage people to gather. Lighting, really quickly. We're kind of categorizing lighting in two ways, sort of event and timed lighting, just to show you how kind of our thinking. So when we talk about event lighting, we're talking about lights that are only on when there's an active use. So these ball field lights would be on when there's games or practices in progress, but otherwise, if there's nothing being used, they're not on. And then timed lighting are lights that will come on for a certain period, but will shut off eventually. A good example of this is the Constellation Garden in the walled garden, the Constellation art piece that comes on at night, but it does shut off generally around 11 o'clock. So these are areas that would encourage some nighttime use, but not all nighttime use. So the basketball courts, pickleball court, cafe space would eventually shut off so people aren't staying there too late. And then just pathway and safety lighting, making sure that lighting, expanding that so pathways are lit, using dark sky compliant fixtures, and really lighting where we need to light. So on the north side, that includes, these cut through areas that are served for bicyclists so they can commute back and forth in the evening hours, and around parking areas. On the south side, making sure these building campus areas have adequate lighting for people to get to their cars for evening classes or to and from each building, as well as trying to provide some areas that pedestrians can move through the park safely at night, and increase connectivity. And the last diagram, since it's been mentioned a lot, event spaces. This is just really trying to show where we think events should happen. And I think it goes to that question, are we doing this to make bigger events? No, we're actually trying to rein in events a little bit, because right now there are no constraints on where events can really be set up. And that's what we're trying to define a little bit better. So some of our suggested uses on the south side of the park, what we think, at the Fruit Knoll and the Mellon Lawn, these should really just be public events. This is the heart of the park. So any event that happens here should be free to the public to attend. It's not appropriate for a private event to take over the heart of a public space. And that's generally what happens there now. So just trying to define that a little bit better and wrangle that in. The walled garden and the terrace garden, really more appropriate for private events like weddings or some smaller public events, but not very large gatherings. And then, the buildings that are currently on site in this campus area are really, really appropriate for educational programming, art classes, adult classes, etc. Those are the types of things that we think should be occurring in those buildings. On the north side, the yellow areas, athletic events, so baseball, permits for baseball, softball, etc., is what really these spaces should be used for. In the tennis bubble, they shouldn't be shut down necessarily for private events or anything like that. It should be, given precedent for athletic use. This area in between, the rectangular field, this is kind of that flex space we thought would work well on this part of the park, where it's primarily an athletic field use, but it could also be used to host public events as well. And then this idea of access to set up these events, who's going to be allowed to do it. These are the suggested access routes that people could use to set up their events. And again, that would require DPW to knock down a bollard to allow you access. But generally, the intent is cars don't leave the parking lot unless it is an authorized vehicle, or with the exception of this area for deliveries and whatnot for loading for these two facilities. That was a lot. We don't have a lot of time for open discussion. We can put that, we have that poll ready for the south part. People want to take that quickly, and I'm happy to hang on longer if people have additional comments or questions. But if you guys want to take a moment to fill that out, that'd be helpful. Thank you all for bearing with us. That was a lot of information that we had to go through. We appreciate you staying on late.
I just want to say bravo. You guys have done an amazing job with this.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Yeah, same from me. And of course, we can all say thanks, but great job.
I want to ditto that sentiment. This was very impressive and gives me great enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to also thank all of you for continued engagement in this process, because we couldn't have gotten here without all of your feedback. So a lot of thanks to go around.
When you were doing your plans, did you consider how all of these new residences and offices in Bakery Square are going to use and impact the park?
We did, and I think that again, that's why we made sure that we tried to engage with those residences. I think, I mean, I can't speak for sure, but I imagine they've been part of our engagement process. But
They have been. We've reached out to their property managers, and they have emailed them and included them in all of the engagement process so far. Sorry, Brandon.
No, and I think the second piece to that, though, is we've also wanted to make sure that we were talking to the communities in and around Mellon Park to make sure that everyone, it's not just the new kids on the block who should get the say of what happens in the park. Right. There's a lot of use, and a lot of what we've heard is people generally like what is here. So, we're not proposing a lot of new things, a lot of new program. I think we're kind of responding to kind of that adage of if it's not broke, don't fix it, per se. And I think a lot of people like what Mellon Park offers, and there's not a need to, there's issues that we, where things are located, how they're maintained, et cetera, that we can try and address. But we didn't feel the need to blow up the park and make it completely new.
Is the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts on sound financial footing?
That I could not answer. I'm not sure.
I think they're not even an organization anymore.
They're closed.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's part of it, the Marshall Building, which had galleries that were part of Pittsburgh Center for the Arts and Filmmakers, I think is no longer that. You referred to it as city parks, and then on the map it shows it as Pittsburgh Center for Puppetry on Google Maps. But the other building, the big stone building, has active classes in it under the auspices of the Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media, which is, I'm not sure how that reformed out of the filmmakers. I'm not sure exactly how it all worked, but it's operating. There are currently classes there.
Charlie's still here?
Brandon, I don't know if you can hear me, but it's Elizabeth. It's really important that people know that Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media is alive and well and doing great.
Good.
They are not in the yellow building anymore. All their work is being done out of the Scaife building where all the studios are. But please, they're doing a fabulous job online and in person, and have done for they did great during the COVID. So everyone should know that they are doing great. They're just not in that gallery space anymore.
Yeah, they're using the Scaife building as gallery space. In fact, right now there's an exhibition that just started of the instructors called Those Who Teach. And I guess it's just around in that building. I haven't yet been there for it.
Thank you for
But
clarifying.
my kid is taking classes there and they're continuing.
And Maren.
The poll results. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat right now. Aaron, is it possible to put the poll results back up for Mellon Park North or South?
The South is still up.
They went up briefly.
Well, the result, can we get the results back up to share, or?
Yes, I'm trying to, hold on one second.
Yeah, another thing, again, if people have other questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them, but the plans, both a PDF document of this presentation, as well as some images of the plans and a very short survey, are available on the Engage PGH website. It's live. So anyone who can't make any of the presentations, or if there's other additional feedback or thoughts, or you just want to look at things more closely, all that information is up and available on the website. Peruse at your convenience.
I had a question about the shared use paths. Will there be a demarcation so that pedestrians will have a reserved, maybe the right side, and bicyclists will be on the left side? Or is it just one path and it's a pedestrians have to dodge bicyclists?
This is something, and we need to work a little more closely with Bike PGH on that. Because part of the issue when you make a demarcation is that bicyclists will then becomes a sense of ownership over the sides.
Yes.
And bicyclists might go quicker if they think they have a dedicated route, which might actually be counterproductive for safety.
I would want to chime in there as a pedestrian. I find that bicyclists already do that.
Sure.
And so there's no, they come up from behind, for example, on Fifth Avenue, and I'm not saying these bicyclists will necessarily be in the park, but they, it's not safe to ride your bike in the street at Fifth Avenue or in Penn Avenue. So they need to ride on the sidewalk. And I don't really think they consider that ideal either, but it's how it is today and it's how it will be for the next decade at least. And if the city could do something to encourage bicyclists to yield to pedestrians, or preferably stop when they see a pedestrian. They know we don't have eyes in the back of our head. Multiple times I've almost been hit. It's a deterrent to walking to the park. Not everyone is, I like the improvements you're making on Beechwood Boulevard, but not everyone comes from Beechwood Boulevard. And essentially, the north side of the park is a bicyclist cut through. They're not going to be bringing their bikes in there. They're going to be a certain subset of bicyclists who are just flying through because they're not coming to the park. They're using it as a cut through.
Right. Yeah.
So pedestrian safety as an individual, it's dangerous. And if you're pushing a baby in a buggy or have a toddler with you, it's even more dangerous. So I would say the path becomes the bicyclist path. And as a pedestrian, I would walk in the grass next to the path. That would be the safest route, I would say. For me, that's what I would do.
Except a stroller isn't necessarily going to be able to do that unless it's a
right,
stroller.
Right, that's true.
So
that's true.
Some kind of demarcation. New, like right now, there's the print on the road for shortened bicyclists showing for share lanes where the bike can go in with the car, and probably officially bikes are supposed to go in Fifth Avenue and Penn Avenue, but I will not bicycle on Penn Avenue. Too many people die.
Right.
So,
and I wouldn't recommend that a bicyclist does. It's just too dangerous. But then they come on the sidewalk and treat pedestrians like drivers treat the bicyclists. So then you have another problem. And if we collide on these narrow sidewalks, we're going to end up in traffic going 50 miles an hour because we know
what I
does
thought
that.
of was to avoid paving more space to be able to have it physically separated, have an image of a person walking so that the bicyclists are told, just as the cars on the share lanes are told, bikes use this too, and they're entitled. On those particular roads, which are just not safe for bicyclists, have an image of a bike and a pedestrian sort of alternating to remind the bicyclists that that pedestrians are entitled to use it. And so
yeah, I think something similar to
psychological.
Right. That the image we're showing here, I think, is kind of getting to that. Like it's highlighting it.
Yeah.
And also in terms of these shared pathways are going to be 10 feet wide. So, and that's intentional. That's to give people the space to move around.
Is
so
that more pavement than the existing sidewalks?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah,
the
the existing
sidewalk
sidewalks are like
Avenue
5
isn't
feet.
10 feet
So
wide, not at all.
Yeah, certainly better make it permeable.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
going
well,
to take my dog for a walk by Mellon Park and let you excellent people figure out the rest of this. So good night. Appreciate it very much.
Hey, Brandon, while we're talking about pathways, I wanted to just point out Cindy had some questions about the use of the pathways and for vehicular traffic.
Yes. Cindy, are you still on? Do you have specifics?
Yeah, I checked. That's why I figured she's
Okay.
still on. Let's talk about it.
Let me try and find the best. Maybe this is a good diagram. So in general, so we have a number of 8-foot wide pathways. That's really intended for, I'm trying to find a good map for this, DPW access. You know, they need the ability to drive through this park to get to certain pieces and not tear up lawn areas. But in terms of who else is going to be allowed to drive through the park, this is really where we are going to limit it. So, you know, the intention is, like, for instance, deliveries and loading for, you know, DPW, PIP's garden center would come in through that cobble drive. And then they could use this area to turn around and get out, but there would be bollards at each one of these pathways. Now, when an event needed to be held, DPW could drop that bollard down in order to facilitate if a truck needs to come through here and access these pathways. But that's it. That's the only place that we are considering allowable for anyone outside of the city to access the site. And conversely,
access to the garden center for, especially for instructors or for handicapped participants, that's a potential issue. And is the parking going to be the same amount as is there currently in those 3 parking areas? Because previously, when there were classes in the garden center, and you're talking about adding more instructional space, so there could potentially be more classes, the road up from Beechwood was, the upper section of it was parked up, as well as the parking lots sometimes when there were multiple classes going.
So there won't be as much parking. And this was something we've been discussing with Center for the Arts and Media and FIPS, because obviously they don't want to lose parking. But there's a reason for that, and that is that the existing parking is not up to code, meaning it's the dimensions are not for city standard. So if we were to do any improvements, we'd have to bring it up to code, and there's actually not enough room to bring the current parking to code. Basically, it would fill up on this side if we were to maintain the kind of the current parking configuration, which is, you know, sort of 3 bays of parking. Yeah, it would go from this wall almost all the way to the stairs at Center for the Arts and Media, that kind of that little stoop that comes off the back. So there'd be no room for pedestrian pathway to get around.
So you'd be keeping the existing parking as it is with the cobblestones and everything?
No, we would not. That's this cobblestone drive would be kind of converted to long term. It would be converted to just the loading and access drive. Center for the garden.
Well, the right-hand side of the parking is cobblestone. I'm pointing at the screen as though you can see my cursor. Where right there. So that's currently cobblestone, and then it just continues down past the garden center entrance and connects to the back road there. But so you're saying if you were to improve it, you would need to make those spaces bigger. So you're not going to improve it to keep the same number of spaces?
No. We are going to improve it, but that is why we have to. We're not able to put back as much as is there. So, and that's actually, and where this is really felt is this location, where currently there's a drive lane and head-in parking on both sides. But under code, there's not enough room to actually fit that between the garage and the Marshall building. So this sort of one-way circulation and this angled parking that we're showing was the minimum we could get to reduce the basically to fit through here, still provide pedestrian access, and maintain as much parking as we possibly could.
So I see. What you have is you have parking along the sides and the road in the middle instead of the loopy, what it's sort of inside out of what it is now.
Correct. Yeah, because that would, this would be a sea of asphalt with to bring it up to code, would be a sea of asphalt.
Okay, it's hard to see on this. If you can just zoom in there, that would be helpful, because the one-way access, which now I'm getting, I was wondering why the slantiness is looked opposite of logic, but now I see why.
Right, you would come in this way, and there's benefits to that too, because one-way circulation is just safer from pedestrian vehicular conflict. Everyone knows where cars are coming.
Yeah, and
So-
in that case, you're getting, you're devoting less space to roadway, so that's fine.
Right, and one thing we are going to, we're still trying to find code is there might be opportunity to actually put in a couple parallel parking spaces along these sort of drive aisles. We need to figure out what the dimensions are. So we're trying to mitigate the amount of lost parking. I think right now it's about losing 10 spaces, and we know these parking lots fill at
Yeah,
in the
and
evenings.
we definitely need better public transit in this city. I mean, one of the things that Ed was saying is, we should not be emphasizing cars so much at all. Let's have less parking. And it's like, that would be great if there were a public transit way to get there, because this isn't just a neighborhood park, it's a city park. And especially when you're talking about the Center for the Arts and the Garden Center, it's very much a citywide resource.
Yeah,
And we
it
don't have
is.
good public transportation here. So there's lots of places you can't take a bus to here from.
Right. And yeah, and that's the thing we've struggled with too, because we don't love parking in parks. That's not great. But I mean, we have to deal with the fact that there's some amenities that have a regional draw. But if we can improve pedestrian access and bike access and public transit access, even locally, that might help reduce the amount of car demands, right? Right now it's safer to get in your car and drive to the north side of the park than it would be to try and walk along Fifth Avenue and dodge traffic. So if we can make those improvements, we might encourage people who live closer to be able to just come here by foot. That's the hope.
Yeah.
I may have missed, are you also talking about putting solar panels and charging stations in these lots?
I think we were not, but I think we can. I think per our last conversation, I think that's a consideration we need to look into.
Yeah.
How could that work?
And the other thing that you might think about is bike parking and scooter parking and that kind of stuff too. So.
Yes, bike parking, we did. And this was something we talked with, we met with Bike Pittsburgh to get their input on. Because there's actually there's one bike rack in all of Mellon Park in front of the Marshall building. If you can believe it.
Yeah.
So kind of
I've used it.
sprinkling bike racks, not just at entrances or like key locations, but where people actually want to get to. Is one of the ideas is just kind of spreading it out. Because people want to be near their bike too. You don't want to park your bike at an entrance and then go to the ball field and not have it in eyesight. That's how things get stolen.
No, but around the buildings, around where people are going into classes, they would be good to have bike racks and not just.
Yeah, like kind of these entrances.
Yeah, exactly. Where,
To be able to go zip right where you're going in a cautious and deferential to pedestrian sort of way, of course.
Of course, it's very important. Can't say all bikers do it, but I know there's a lot of respectful cyclists out there.
well, maybe dedicating some of the parking spaces to biking, one or two. So.
That's a good
Well,
suggestion.
Cycling, bicycles do not take nearly as much space, and they can tuck in under trees where a car should not go.
Right.
If you have a secure rack, and they also benefit from cover. So if there's naturally covered places, like the covered thing by the Marshall building near the garden, you've got tables under cover. Include a bike rack under there. That's an idea. Include a bike rack under there.
That's a good, yeah, that's not something I considered. That is a
Because
really good idea.
bicyclists, bikes are better off under cover, and it's not that hard to provide it.
Especially if you're building solar panels over the car park.
Yeah, and if you're building, I don't know how much the trees, have to see how the tree exposure is, but I agree with put solar anywhere you can.
Agreed.
And
Those are
then
all
bike
really
racks under the solar.
Yeah, I know when Phipps was talking about their renovation, they were looking at this area for solar power. So I think we can revive that.
Some can go there. Exactly how it goes, I have to go there. I do frequent there pretty often, but getting more solar. And so the DPW place will stay there as a DPW place behind the fence?
For now. We don't know the future of that. But we can only design for what we know, and we
Uh-huh.
know right now that's their facility, and
still
we'd like to
there.
keep it
Okay.
that way. And yeah, obviously renovate that fence, clean it up, try and hide it a little bit. We also think DPW having a presence in Mellon Park is important
Mhm.
for the maintenance of Mellon Park and the care of Mellon Park. So I don't think we want to see it go.
Mhm. How about the little hut on stilts behind the Scaife building? I guess it's still there, that little thing.
That
That
is an
will remain there. What?
Yes, that's an outdoor kiln.
Well, it's a place that they bring the outdoor kiln out to, but what's up above?
I think that's
Because I've worked with that kiln once, and I always thought I would see it there, but now when I go and pick up my kid, it's like it's just empty under there. It's a little hut on stilts. But what's up in the hut? How do you get there?
I don't know. That's I'm gonna ask that question. Maybe I'll reach out to Kyle.
And
if
those
he-
little blue stripy things that look like a Wi-Fi signal, is that some amphitheater, some little bench seating or something?
yeah, some kind of terrace seating that might whether it's artists out there with a sketch pad or if they're doing a
People can watch the kiln.
exactly, yeah, to try and provide some more usable
Yeah,
outdoor
outdoor classroom space and right there, and then the speaker can be under the hut,
the kiln hut, yes.
the kiln hut. Anyway, lots of great work and thought has gone into this. And I was impressed at how diverse the input from the various breakout rooms was. All very good points.
Yeah, all good points, all things we definitely need to consider. That's why we have these meetings, because we get a lot of good feedback. we
Glad I
we
caught wind of
appreciate
it.
you all spending the time and even running a little extra.
So I have a question. Is the city committed to implementing the design that comes out of this, or do they have to hire, like in Westinghouse Park, they're actually engaging a planning firm to create the master plan? And I'm just curious as to whether PPC has that same stature, so that the ideas that you come out of this can be translated into actionable work orders.
Plans.
Sure. So essentially, this is the master plan. So rather than hiring a consultant, we're kind of serving in that regard. And then, I don't want to speak for the city, but the idea is, the end product is we have this kind of master plan, this vision that everyone buys in. We identify the different types of projects, what their priorities are, when they should happen, how much they might cost. And then also identify funding opportunities, whether that's the city allocating capital budget, year 1, year 5, whatever, but whether it's pursuing state funding or grant funding or donor gifts to get these projects moving, try and identify, what's the best approach to getting these things implemented. And that's the challenge with master plans is
sure
everyone gets excited about it, but the reality of budget and time, and they take time to implement.
I noticed that Marty Battistone was on earlier. So is she also sort of overseeing this project for the city planning?
And we've been coordinating directly with the city on everything. So
Good,
it's
okay.
we're not
Just curious.
we made sure to try and make sure we're not promising something that they don't feel comfortable being able to deliver, or they don't like, or it's something they can't maintain. So that's actually why this meeting was supposed to be in February, and we had to push it back a month because of all the bridge stuff. The city, our partners at DPW, didn't have time to sit down and really digest what we were proposing. So we needed to wait. So they, had their opportunity to talk and get a plan that we're all in agreement on. So,
Yeah, well, considering this is going to take a long time to implement, it's better to get, everybody on board before, proceeding. And you're not really proposing major new construction, new buildings, or, moving it's not like you're putting in a new center for the arts or anything like that. So
Right, yeah, and it's not like we're not proposing to touch every square foot of park and
Right,
totally renovate it. It's really more kind of strategic improvements that need to happen to facilitate better park use for the future.
Good. All right. Well, I'll sign off and say well done and look forward to the next session. So,
Great. Well, thank you for attending. We appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
Take care. Is there any other comments, anything else before we close it up for the evening? All right. I'll take that silence as time to wrap it up. So thank you all again. We really appreciate you taking the time and spending all this time with us on a Tuesday evening. And if you have any other questions, comments, feel free to email me or fill out a survey. And we look forward to hearing from you and continuing to engage with you folks on this. We're excited.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.